This video was made in sponsorship with Hear Well, Be Well Clinics. Compassionate, trustworthy, and innovative. Check them out.
Hello, Heather and Kathleen. Thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Hear Me Out. How are you guys doing today?
Very good. Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Yes, very
yes.
happy to join.
Wonderful. Well, I like to start all of my guests off with the question, what is your connection to hearing loss? So whichever one of you would like to start off with that, we can get into it.
I can start, and my answer is I don't really have a connection to hearing loss. And I did have a grandma who wore hearing aids, which is true for many people. But I actually got into the field from being a pro musician, and I got into audiology to work in hearing conservation. So my connection to the field is in terms of hearing loss prevention. That said, my specialty is music audiology. I've been a music audiologist for almost 12 years, and I have worked a lot with musicians who have hearing loss and hearing disorders. So over the past decade, I have become a lot more connected to that side of our profession and those communities through my patient base, through my private practice, which is called Soundcheck Audiology.
Amazing. Hello.
Okay, we're gonna have a special guest for a little bit. Um, my conne- the dinosaur party. Yes, yes, yes. But first, let's talk about audiology. So, my connection to hearing loss, like Heather, I don't have hearing loss myself. I came to it like a lot of audiologists, thinking that I was going to go into speech language pathology first. I went to speech for about 10 years when I was younger. And then I started taking the prereqs. I was a music major in college. And realized pretty quickly that this was just not for me. And I liked the audiology coursework way more. Have not regretted it a single moment. Definitely audiology is the way to go for me.
That's so cool. I love hearing like how people get into different programs, and that just sounds so fun when you get to take those different courses and it just drives you onto a different path. That's wonderful. So I want to talk a little bit about Tuned because this is a really cool business that you guys are a part of. So let's start off like what inspired Tuned?
Yeah, so I'm head of audiology for Tuned. Kathleen is head of provider operations for Tuned. So she's my analytical, organized counterpart, which has been wonderful. Tuned's inspiration is making access to audiologists and audiologic care um, affordable and accessible. And we are based in the US at the moment. So we're only in the USA. We're hoping to expand at some point. But for those who know sort of the market here and the populations, working age individuals don't really have access or education in terms of audiologic care. So we are a benefit for employees where they can see an audiologist via teleaudiology, have a really robust three-part hearing screening, have guidance, triage, so referrals on. That's one of the things that we are really, I would say, good at is the integrity of looking at someone and saying, hey, you need something beyond this. Maybe you need to see an ear, nose, and throat physician or an audiologist in person. But that's getting into the nitty-gritty. The inspiration behind it was really to make audiologists accessible to working age individuals.
That's incredible.
Kathleen,
And
do
I
you want
think
to add? Do you want to add
Yeah,
anything to that?
yeah. I think that that's always been the most compelling part of it is like how do we reach this di giant demographic that's just not being thought about? There's so many outdated, and April, you're aware of this, outdated, thinking around hearing loss and who it impacts, and that it's not just older people. So that paired with how do we rethink the model to get it as easy to access as possible and get it to become part of like mainstream healthcare has been a really fun challenge.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing is um, to create a hub of specialists. So I mentioned that my specialty is music audiology. We have about 10 or 12 music audiologists on the platform, and some of our contracts are with Music Cares, so through the Grammys, the Grammy Foundation, and now Sweet Relief out in California, helping the pro music industry. So individuals you think of, maybe artists themselves, or audio engineers, or stage hands, techs, and all of the above, videographers, photographers, they're able to have care on the platform as well, covered under grants. And so we're also kind of revolutionary in that aspect as well, because a lot of these folks do not live near someone with this specialty. And so we're just, again, increasing access for those who need it.
That's incredible. And I think you touched on a really great point there, the education factor that's missing in all different industries, whether it's music or construction or wherever. Like that's where it needs to start is with education. Because a lot of people, I mean, I didn't know I had hearing loss until I noticed I had issues, but I probably had it for a lot longer. I just didn't know what I was missing, and I didn't have that educational factor to like push me to get the help I needed. So that is interesting. Um, yeah. And so what do you think Tuned is doing to kind of change the hearing health game? Because I would say it's starting really to become more mainstream. And so what is Tuned doing to kind of change that?
Not to keep jumping in first, Kathleen, but I actually have I have something to say about this based on an experience I had yesterday. So, I think, let me preface this by saying, I think one of the biggest things that we are changing is getting the word audiologist in front of people's eyes, educating them about the need for us, and then getting them a hearing screening and a conversation with an audiologist. So you personally mentioned you had hearing loss prior to when you knew about it. Hearing loss can happen gradually over time for some people. They don't realize they have it until it gets severe. But really, we want to catch it either right away or we want to prevent it from happening, depending on what the cause is. And my example from yesterday, a working age woman, lovely woman who I met at a local dentist office. So I went to the dentist, preventive care, and she's, chatting with me. As soon as she finds out that I'm an audiologist, of course, the questions come out. This happens to all of us because we're so rare in culture. Oh, you work with hearing? Let me ask you XYZ. Oh, she's been noticing things for the past 5 or 6 years. They have a lot of sound exposure at the dentist's office, this and that. And I casually say, Northeast Ohio, where I am, is a hotbed of audiologists. We have audiologists everywhere here. And I say, well, have you gone to an audiologist? There's like 5 around. Oh, no. Oh, no, it's just, to go to call, make the appointment, and go to the office, and then I'd have to pay for it and all this stuff. And so, of course, I said, well, what if you had a benefit where you could go online, even during your lunch break, talk to an audiologist, do a screening, and get some guidance? And it was like a light bulb moment for her. And she's like, oh, that sounds so easy. I could definitely do that. So the example, like for you, maybe if 20 years ago, when maybe something started, if you would have had the ability, or 10 years ago, to speak with an audiologist, perhaps your journey would have started sooner. And that's one of the things we're changing is we're getting care to individuals much, much sooner than they would get it otherwise because they're not inclined to go to the office where maybe their grandma and grandpa got hearing aids.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part is that we've created this separation between like device and audiology. So many people think that all of audiology or anything related to hearing, the end game is hearing aids, and you really have like the audiologists don't really have anything else to offer. As Heather was mentioning, we've created this like separation between the two where there are plenty of reasons to consult with an audiologist, or at least to like know about your hearing even if you have absolutely no motivation or need for hearing aids. And that's been like that is a major shift within hearing healthcare, I think.
Yeah, and April, you mentioned you had one of our providers, Dr. Firmela Zadroik, on the show, Hannah, and I do chart reviews every week, and I just want to give a shout out to Hannah that she's really great on hearing conservation. And a lot of the individuals we see, maybe even 50%, come to the platform and that's their priority. They're asking providers like her, hey, I go to concerts every weekend, or I'm exposed at work, or I wear a headset for 8 hours a day at my job. How can I protect myself? And so I really think hopefully, my hope is that in the next decade or so, we're going to see a huge shift in um, the prevention of hearing loss because of individuals like ourselves who are starting things sooner. Because even individuals who have hearing loss need to learn about hearing loss prevention. It is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you find with the new Apple AirPod settings, while that's not quite, the distinguished as a hearing aid, do you think that's going to change how mainstream kind of perceives hearing health? Do you think that's going to like maybe wake up a lot of people?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that. Um, this is always such a touchy subject for audiologists, right? And especially with me also being a private practice owner, I love the AirPods. I think creation of things like this and sort of that OTC side is such a needed thing. because individuals that we see maybe with mild hearing loss, or maybe they need a little help in background noise, things like that, this is a great tool for them. And to be able to talk to an audiologist, get their hearing screened. And I should mention, as we're talking about this, that one of the things we do is a really lengthy questionnaire looking for medical red flags. So I just want to throw in that I think that's really important, even when someone's interested in learning how to use the AirPods, which we do teach a lot of people how to use them. There's a lot that goes into it first. Why do they have hearing loss? Do they need to be referred on? Let's take care of what needs to be taken care of first, make sure it's just they can use these and that's fine. But to get back to the original question, I hope that within, again, the next decade, we're going to see a lot of people using devices like that, and having less listening fatigue out in the world and really enjoying their lives more. I hope that we see that it increases quality of life for tens of thousands of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's again like a huge it's a huge sign that we have the largest tech company in the world that's concerned about hearing and is talking about hearing. And I've actually been impressed with like how much research Apple did around it. Everything that they're putting out is like very research and evidence based, and their explanations, their educational material, I've thought it's been fantastic so far. It won't be right for everyone. I think people will understand that. There's a lot of people that just immediately, when it comes up in consultations, because I try to work with the technology they already have. So if they mention they have AirPods, or I see they took the screener on AirPods, I'll mention it to them, and immediately some of them will say, "Okay, no, there's no way I'm wearing that in a social situation." But it's great for them to at least know it's there, to experiment with it, to see, to get a taste of what it could be like to have any sort of hearing amplification, and then decide where if there are further steps that are needed. And I think that's where audiologists get caught up. People are nervous that they'll try AirPods, maybe it won't be right for them, and they'll think, okay, that's all hearing technology. I'm not going to go on from there.
Right.
But again, I think it's all about the messaging and how you're framing it. And the more that audiologists talk about it with folks, I think the better, because then they'll understand, okay, this is one option along a spectrum of solutions. There are plenty of other things that could be done to be hearing better. And this is just, one facet that isn't right for everyone, but it could be a great option for a lot of people.
Yeah, and
Really. And if you
anecdotally, it would be nice to see a study on this eventually, but anecdotally, what we're seeing is if someone sets up on the AirPods up on their own, okay, fine, whatever. They seem to do better with some audiologic guidance. So having an audiologist explain things to them, help them tweak it, teach them how to use it. We are seeing currently some better outcomes. But again, I don't have evidence to point to that. So maybe that will come out at some point. But that's what we're seeing currently. The other thing about working with an audiologist, a lot of people don't know that AirPods can be customized in terms of fit too. So I've heard a lot of people just in my personal life say, oh, those don't stay in my ears. I can't wear those. They're not comfortable. But you can actually have an audiologist make custom sleeves for them so that they stay in your ears a little more comfortably and you feel like you can get the sound, out of them a little bit better. So it's worth noting.
That's cool. And I feel like the AirPods might be a stepping stone for a lot of people too, to get them into your office. Like they're like, oh, I want to try this. And then that's like the opportunity for the conversations to happen. So while it might not be the right fit for them, it could be a really great stepping stone for a lot of people just to get in front of an audiologist. Well, hopefully.
Yeah,
That's
and this
really
is where
exciting.
like audiologists sometimes unintentionally act as gatekeepers. So again, it's like all about if you are conveying that messaging that like this is a valid option and like we welcome you in the clinic, it's not a competition. I think
Mhm.
that does go a long way.
I
Totally.
agree.
Yeah. And I think too, I was having this conversation with my dad yesterday because he's new to hearing aids. And we were just talking about what is about hearing aids that we'd want to change. And cost was the number one thing we both were talking about, and how we wish more people could afford them. And again, I think the AirPods could be this opportunity for people who need it, a stepping stone to go in the right direction to maybe eventually get to the point of, a hearing aid, while it is more costly, it is a great transition and can help preserve a bit of their hearing before it gets worse. Is that true? Like, can a hearing device help preserve what you do have available, or
To
That's
yes
an
a
and no, I
tricky
guess,
extent.
depending on,
question. That's a
Yeah.
tricky, well, and we're talking about AirPods.
Yeah.
And
yeah, true.
maybe, although that's not an official, that hasn't been officially stated from Apple or anything, but I do know some people who are working on using them as hearing protection. In terms of hearing aids themselves, I would not say so because I'm a hearing
Okay.
conservationist. Of course, it
Right.
depends on what kind of sound you're exposed to, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot that goes into that. Kathleen, I don't know what your take on that
Yeah,
is.
I would like my mind goes to the auditory deprivation element and like
Oh,
potentially the protective factor for like word recognition score. Like, will you be able to keep the clarity up? But even that, that research I think is a little outdated and hasn't been redone with the modern hearing aids as far as I've seen.
yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. And then I'm really curious what you feel is the biggest misconception when it comes to the hearing loss industry.
I've been answering everything first. Kathleen, I'll let you go first.
Um, I think that a lot of people don't understand like I think the anatomy and physiology of the auditory system is like absolutely fascinating. I don't think people understand how complex of an issue hearing loss is and why it is so complicated to solve. Like basically why it isn't the equivalent of glasses, why it would need to be a very like tailored solution for certain people and the how like a comprehensive approach is really important. Um, I think that that's a big misconception. Is a lot of people think it's just going to be this like plug and play option where you'll just get hearing aids. They don't understand that there's any like other factors that go into it, and then that would solve all of your issues. Along with that, I don't think people understand that hearing loss can be connected essentially to like every part of the body. There are so many ramifications of hearing loss, specifically on quality of life, social, emotional well-being, but then all of these ties to other comorbid conditions. And I just don't think we really view it in that way, that this is like a healthcare issue and it is part of your overall health and well-being, and not just like an electronic category. It's very tricky because obviously the technology is an element there, but that's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with all of that. And I think too, a common misconception about hearing health is that it only relates to those with severe hearing loss or maybe severe balance disorders or things like that. And as someone coming from working in prevention, I think it's worth noting that so many people are walking around cities, the country, the world with mild hearing loss, moderate hearing loss. They don't know they have it, and yet they're experiencing fatigue,
Right.
exhaustion, maybe difficulties at work, and they don't know the reason. And it is becoming so easy to see an audiologist or even just do an online hearing screening anywhere. One thing Tuned has done was try to take the screening and the audiology component, put them together, put the devices to the side, and just really focus on the person and care about the person. People are so used to going to the dentist or going and getting their vision checked, and maybe that's because they have a benefit through their employer. Looking at taking whole head health and
Right.
including the ears, that's really the shift that needs to happen. And that's the misconception is that the ears are just as important as your eyes and your teeth for your overall well-being.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think it was Dr. Olson. I saw a clip of him saying like he had mild vision loss when he was younger, and the eye doctor was like, "No, you don't need glasses." And he's like, "No, I need them." And he got them. He's like, "What a difference!" And so he shifted his perspective with mild hearing loss. Like they might not need that hearing aid, but when they get it, they're like, "Wow, that does make a difference of their overall well-being,
Yeah,
their hearing
absolutely.
health." And yeah, like when
Mo-
I was first diagnosed, it was mild on the left side. I didn't might not have needed a hearing aid, but the audiologist was like, "No, let's do it." Still had one good year, and I noticed like even though I was stubborn to wear it at first, it was a game changer. Like it
Yeah.
really changed my overall like brain fog, like probably hearing fatigue. It was a learning curve, but mild hearing loss. Now I'm moderate to severe, so a little different, but it is very interesting how it can be so impactful.
It's interesting and culturally, I mean, it's 2025 and everyone's about wellness and self-care and I'm a mom who has recently had two kids in 2 years, right? So a lot of the stuff I see on social media are these mom influencers who are telling me how to eat, how to lose weight, all this stuff. And I think where's the hearing component here? Because of course I'm an audiologist. The self-care of getting a screening, taking care of yourself It is a self-care thing. And like Kathleen said, of course, it's much more than that. It's related to your whole body and how you interact with the world and everything else. But at the very, very basic level, it's loving yourself and taking care of yourself.
Well, and
That's
that's where, so the self-care element and this whole like wellness craze right now, that's where I find it so hypocritical that all of these fitness studios blast the music. It's like
Yeah.
you're all about wellness, you're preaching wellness, like, some of these places you feel like you're going to church, they like make it this like spiritual experience. And then you're actively injuring part of your body. It's just like such a weird disconnect. And it's a lack of education. People don't know. And people are always shocked by that part when we say, the big statistic of 1.5 billion young adults worldwide at risk of permanent but preventable hearing loss due to noise exposure. Um, People have no idea. But I do think it's changing. Like the fact that there are some earplug companies that have made hearing conservation like mainstream. Loop, for example, no connection to Loop, not sponsored. Like the fact that they have like hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. I don't know how they did it, but I'm very grateful they did because they've made it a normal conversation for people to have.
It's
abs-
I think it's their design. I had a guy in my office on Wednesday who I saw for an appointment, and he was getting custom earplugs. And I said, "Well, what have you been using for the past, number of years?" Loop. When he didn't know they were called Loop, he said the ones with the little circle. He like knew the look. And I have a story, which Kathleen, I don't know if you know this story, but back in I think it was 2018, I went to a local Soul Cycle. I don't know if those are as popular as they used to be, but so I went in and I said, I'm an audiologist and I want to bring in, I used the NIOSH sound level meter app. I said, I just want to use this and see on an iPad, can I take a class and take a measurement? They're like, oh yeah, cool. We're healthy here. And I was like, okay, great. First of all, I could not keep up with the class. I don't know if you've ever taken a cycle class. They're really
They're
hard.
hard.
It was like a very embarrassing moment for me, but I had fun. But so I took an average over the whole class. I think it was a half hour, 40-minute class. The average dBA SPL level was 100 dB. There were peaks, of course, higher than that, but that was average. Now, April, that is safe for 15 minutes of exposure. And
wow.
so I went back to this Soul Cycle location and I said, here's what I found. I wrote it up for them. And of course I was trying to build business at that point, right? So I'm like, you can refer people to me for custom earplugs and your employees should have them. And I said, at least put out a bowl of foam earplugs. And I actually took a bag of them in, put these out. They were not interested. They were not
Interesting.
interested. They asked me about liability and other things, and of course, but it was really fascinating to me. And that's the end of my story. That was the whole thing. I took measurements, 100 dB average. It's crazy.
But that's a good
That's
point. And I
wild.
mean, with my experience for my channel stuff, people seem very weird about their ears, like hearing aids and how it's going to look and what people are going to think of like earplugs and all this stuff. And it's just, I just think, yeah, it's a whole educational piece about like there's it's okay. Like, don't worry about earplugs showing or your AirPods or hearing aids or whatever. It's very fascinating.
I think it'll
Okay.
change, especially with things like AirPods and OTC. And an example I can think of, again, not to bring up the music industry again, but it's the world I work in. You look back to the 90s or 80s when my mentors in the field were first fitting custom earplugs. People were laughing at them. Nobody wanted
Right.
to wear earplugs. It was not cool. It was a sign of like weakness. And now it's the opposite. So when a music industry professional gets the chance at getting custom earplugs, it's like a rite of passage. It's like a status symbol now that they have something like that. And I think that the movement of OTC hearing aids, at least the cool ones, not the big, ugly, whatever that we see for you can get for $50 or whatever, but like the really good ones, I think that that will have the same effect in the general population. I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And like you mentioned, so April, you mentioned before cost, you just mentioned stigma, like that those two and lack of perceived difficulty are like always the top three reasons people don't get any option. And that hasn't moved. It hasn't changed at all in like the last 20 years. And as Heather said, I do hope that there's a shift. Obviously, we thought the cost would change a little bit by now. We thought OTC would have a more powerful effect on the market. That's a beast of a market to take down, so it hasn't really happened yet. Stigma, like all these different form factors, I do hope it helps, but it is strange how much people are concerned about what other people think, and people don't look at people's ears that much. They just don't. So I notice when other people are wearing hearing aids or earplugs or something because I look at people's ears, but most people don't. And then the lack of perceived benefit or the lack of perceived difficulty, really, hopefully, like really making screenings just a normal part of your like wellness
Yeah.
checkups will help with that. You know, you need to be able to see the numbers to really know, okay, maybe I need to reflect a little bit. There does seem to be something going on here.
Well, and
Yeah.
just to comment on the cost thing as well, I think a lot of consumers or general population don't realize how cost works for audiologists. So small mom and pop stores, like myself, for example, private practice, a lot of us might have higher prices than other larger clinics because we don't push as many units. You know, it's a game on our end as well to try to
I
get
did
low
a TikTok
prices.
on this and people could
Did you?
not believe it.
It's wild. It's
Yeah.
wild. And you look, if you were an audiologist living in our world and you're looking at everyone's different prices, and just for an example, like I don't fit that many hearing aids anymore. And for me to try and lower my prices is like me
Right.
begging one of the companies because they don't get a lot of units from me. But on the flip side of that, one thing I did want to say is that for someone who goes into an audiologist's office, they get a test and maybe they need to get hearing aids and they think it's thousands and thousands of dollars, talk to the audiologist about lower cost options. It might not be something that audiologist fits a lot, but they do have access to things that are like the same price as the higher end OTC. And I
Right.
think that is something that most people don't know. So I think of people who I've seen who, for example, who wouldn't be through tuned, who don't have a benefit. You know, maybe they come
Right.
in and they can only afford $800 or something. There are things to fit that price point, and people really don't realize that, but you need to talk to the audiologist about it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a tricky part too with advocating in general is like feeling comfortable to talk about something like that. Like when it comes to money, it is kind of uncomfortable. So some people might have a hard time being like, is there a cheaper op like that can
Yeah.
be a tricky conversation, but a great point and important conversation to have. Um, and before we end, I would just like to know, is there one thing you would wish people knew about hearing loss or taking care of their hearing health or hearing prevention? Just like what's one thing you wish people knew?
Kathleen, you go first.
Okay. Um, I wish people So, two things. One, you can make an appointment with an audiologist whenever you want. You know, like people think they need to have all of these, you don't need to like fit into this like certain pathway or anything. Okay, sometimes with insurance you might need a referral, but you could see an audiologist whenever you want. It could be as little as like you just want to get a baseline. That's a totally valid reason to see an audiologist. Two, it's never too late to start. Obviously, the earlier the better, but like you could make changes right now that, you know, your future self will be very grateful that you did. It is never like too late to really start the hearing conservation journey. And when you do notice issues, the earlier you intervene, the better. It really that's a slippery slope that a lot of people get into. I see a lot of older people in my other clinical life, and it gets very hard to like acquaint someone with hearing aids for the first time when they're 95 with limited dexterity and vision. You know, you don't want to get to that point. You want to be able to make sure that this is a normal part of your life, and you have the skill set to do it.
That's a great answer. I obviously agree with both of those points, and I think that one of the things it made me think of is for folks who are hearing, born hearing, and interact with the world in a hearing way. That's how you communicate with the world around you, and that is always worth the investment, whether it's prevention or amplification or, you know, what have you. And the same we haven't even talked about vestibular audiology, but it's the same thing. You know, that aspect of your health is always worth the investment as well. Um, I think that one thing I would add, which I do think fits into the question, is one thing I wish people knew is what audiologists, like who we actually are. You know, we are not hearing aid salesmen. I know that some audiologists have done that, and that's And fine, that's fine. And guess what? They're helping a lot of people, and that's okay. But I don't think people realize that, at least in the States, we have doctoral degrees. We have a lot of intricate knowledge about the, like Kathleen said, the anatomy and physiology of the auditory system, disorders, prevention, amplification, every aspect. And I wish people would know that when they see an audiologist, the end goal is not, let's sell this person hearing aids. The end goal is always, how can I make this person's life better? And I know Kathleen and I both practice that way. And I think it's one way audiologists are really misunderstood. Yes, maybe you come to your appointment and you have to pay a certain amount or whatever. Or maybe you have the benefit through Tuned. So many people think they're going to sit down with us and we're going to say, you need X $1,000 hearing aids. That's just not the case. Many people don't need them. Our goal is to improve your quality of life, to improve the communication with the world around you, and to take care of you. And so I think that would be my biggest wish that I wish people would realize.
Those
April,
are
can
wonderful
I
answers.
can I
Yeah.
flip it on you? What do you wish audiologists knew?
Ooh.
Ooh, I think, well, at least here where I live and the ones that I've encountered, I wish it's hard when you're like the last appointment of the day and they don't always necessarily remember all the things to remind you of when it comes to your hearing aids. Like there's a lot of things I had to look up and teach myself about my device. And so sometimes I wish there's just one step further in terms of like the relationship. Maybe it's a print off like how to care for your device or something just little like that where it's like you might forget to mention it because it's part of your day and it's you think you mentioned it because you've seen so many clients, but just those like little tidbits of like a step further where you're like, you know what, here's just a little printout of a couple tips I have for you. You know, if you're in a louder setting, maybe just two volumes, like little tips that you might think aren't that big a deal because again, you think about it all the time. Go that extra mile for the patient. Um,
That's a good one. Yeah, I think audiologists often lose sight of like what we know and what most people know because
right.
they're like you do sort of get appointments can be very repetitive. You
Habit.
say the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
I do agree that like multimodal ways of communicating information is like so important.
Yeah, and I know with my first appointment too, I don't remember half the stuff they told me because I was just like, what? Like I have hearing loss, like what? And so I missed a lot of it. And so if they just had that one little handout or like, hey, like if you have questions, call or whatever, like that step further goes a long way when people get a hearing loss diagnosis or are having issues just with their hearing health in general. And yeah, that's kind of one thing I would feel is important.
I think that's a
Good
really
to
good
know.
reminder for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate you guys coming on. This has been an incredible conversation, and I can't wait for more people to come and discover Tuned and to hopefully benefit from your benefits and see how that all goes. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And hope you don't mind the guest appearance for my son.
No problem. We all have kids, so it's all good.
Oh, good.